There are moments in life when one single piece of paper can dismantle an entire family story. One moment where everything you thought you understood suddenly shifts sideways. For me, that moment came in the form of a faded, crumpled receipt I wasn't supposed to find. A receipt that didn't match the story everyone in my family had repeated for more than 2 decades. A receipt that my cousin had every right to see, but that everyone else insisted should stay buried. 4 years, our family treated a certain night like sacred history, untouchable, unquestionable, fixed. Every time my cousin asked about it, they gave her the same answer. Your dad was doing the right thing. Protecting the family, making sacrifices, you'll understand someday. But the receipt in my hand, dated in ink that looked older than the truth itself, proved he wasn't where he claimed to be. He wasn't doing what he said he was doing. In fact, he was somewhere he absolutely shouldn't have been. Paying for something that contradicted the story her mother, my aunt, held on to until the day she died. And when I showed my cousin the receipt, when she realized the truth for herself, the look she gave me wasn't anger, it was devastation. And suddenly, I wasn't sure who the villain in this story really was. Families are built on stories, some true, some softened by time, and some actively rewritten to keep the peace. My family specialized in rewriting. There were things we didn't talk about, things we pretended never happened, things we covered in thin layers for your own good. My cousin grew up repeating the same line everyone fed her, about her father, that he was a man trying his best, that he made mistakes but none as serious as the rumors suggested, that he loved her too much to ever betray the family. And for a long time, I believed that too, until I found the receipt. Until I saw the date, the location, the signature details that didn't just chip away at the official family version, but demolished it. I didn't show her the receipt to hurt her. I showed it because she deserved to know the truth, because a lie repeated for more than 20 years is still a lie, no matter how protective it was meant to be. Before I tell you what the receipt showed, why it changes everything, and how my family reacted when the truth finally surfaced, take a moment to subscribe to the Conflict Corner. Here, we talk about the stories families try to bury on the truths that refuse to stay hidden. I never expected a grocery bag full of old paperwork to change the way I saw my entire family, but that's exactly how it started. My aunt had passed away a few months earlier, and my mom asked me to help clean out the storage unit she left behind. Most of the boxes were filled with predictable things: holiday decorations, faded photo albums, clothes that still smelled like her perfume, but one box was different. It was small, heavy, and taped shut with layers of packing tape, like someone had wanted it sealed forever. When I opened it, it wasn't sentimental items inside. It was documents. Receipts, letters, envelopes, old appointment cards, forms that looked like they belonged in a file cabinet rather than a storage unit. My cousin wasn't with us that day. She had avoided every part of the cleanup, saying it was too soon, which we all understood. Losing her mom had crushed her. They weren't just close, they were codependent in a way that made sense, once you understood how complicated the family dynamic had always been. So I was alone when I found the receipt, the one that would start everything. At first, it didn't look like anything special, just an old slip of paper folded among others. But when I looked closer, the date hit me like a punch. My family had told the story of that specific night for years. They treated it like a cornerstone of who we were, as if everything that came after hinged on the idea that my uncle, my cousin's dad, had done something noble and selfless. They said he had been working late, trying to earn extra money after their financial situation tanked. They said he was exhausted, pushing himself for his family. They said he missed something important that night, a school performance. A milestone because he was doing the right thing, breaking his back for them, and that no one should judge him for being absent. But the receipt in my hand told a completely different story. It was dated for that exact night. Same day, same hour, same time frame. Everyone insisted he was at work. The address printed at the top was not anywhere near his job. It wasn't even in the same town. And the item description, it made my heart drop. He had been somewhere he shouldn't have been, paying for something he shouldn't have paid for, something that made every family explanation buckle under its own weight. I stared at the paper for a long time, trying to convince myself that maybe it was unrelated, that maybe it belonged to someone else, that maybe he had been running an errand or doing something innocent. But his signature was at the bottom, clear, familiar, undeniable. When I showed it to my mom, her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She didn't gasp. She didn't act surprised. She didn't even ask where I found it. She just closed her eyes and said, "Oh no, she doesn't need to see that." And that was when I knew my cousin had been lied to her whole life. She grew up believing her father was a man who sacrificed for her, believed it so deeply that she built her personality around defending him anytime someone hinted at his flaws. He tried his best. She'd say, he wasn't perfect, but he loved us. But the truth The truth, printed in faded ink and worn from age, told a different story. A story that had been buried so deeply, she never even knew there was something worth questioning. I took the receipt home with me that night, unable to stop staring at it. I kept turning it in my hands, fighting the urge to call her and show it immediately, but I didn't want to break her heart impulsively. I wanted to be sure I was doing the right thing. For days, I researched. I confirmed the location. I checked his old work schedule. I asked subtle questions to family members who had their own versions of events, and every answer led back to the same place. The official family story was a lie. The night everyone insisted he was working late, he wasn't. He was somewhere else, doing something that blew a hole straight through the myth he spent years maintaining. My cousin deserved the truth, but the question I kept asking myself was, did I have the right to be the one to give it to her? It wasn't my father. It wasn't my marriage. It wasn't my lie. But the guilt of staying silent started to feel heavier than the fear of revealing the truth. And then, everything changed the day my cousin came to my house unexpectedly. She looked tired, eyes puffy, like she'd been crying. She said she missed her mom, that she felt like everyone was moving on while she was stuck, unable to make sense of the version of her family she grew up believing. She told me she had questions she never got answers to, especially about that night. The night she always thought to find her father as a devoted provider. Do you ever feel like people in this family hide things from us? She asked. She didn't know how close she was to the truth. My chest tightened. The receipt felt like it weighed 100 pounds inside the drawer where I kept it hidden. Why do you ask? I said carefully. She looked away, wringing her hands. I found one of my mom's journals from years ago, she said, and she wrote something about that night, something that didn't match what everyone told me. She said she felt abandoned, that she didn't know where my dad was, that he wasn't answering calls. I swallowed hard. What did she say about why? Nothing, she whispered. That's the part that scared me. And suddenly, the choice wasn't a choice anymore. It was an obligation. A responsibility that came with knowing the truth when someone else was living inside a lie. I stood up, walked to my drawer, took the receipt, and brought it back to her. The moment she saw the date on top, her entire expression changed. It wasn't confusion, it wasn't shock, it was something deeper, recognition. Like part of her had always known something was off, but never had evidence until now. She held the receipt carefully, like it might burn her fingers. Where did you get this? She asked. When I told her, she didn't speak for a long time. She just stared at the paper as if she were watching her whole world tilt. Her breathing grew uneven, and her eyes filled slowly with tears she didn't want to release. He wasn't working, she whispered. He wasn't trying for us. He wasn't who I thought he was. I reached forward, but she held up a hand, needing space. This changes everything, she said, and it did. Not just for her, but for me, too. Because in that moment, I realized the truth doesn't just free you, it breaks you first. And sometimes, being the one who delivers it makes you the villain in a story you never meant to enter. I thought giving my cousin the receipt would bring clarity, maybe even closure, but instead it cracked something open inside her that she couldn't immediately control. For the first few minutes after reading it, she just sat there, silent, gripping the paper as if it might dissolve if she loosened her fingers. I could see the conflict twisting through her pain, betrayal, confusion, and a strange kind of grief that doesn't hit all at once, but spreads slowly like ink, bleeding through fabric. Her voice finally broke the quiet when she asked, barely above a whisper, "How long did you know?" It was a fair question, one that carried weight. I told her the truth that I had found it just days earlier, that I'd spent hours trying to understand its implications and debating whether or not I should tell her. She didn't accuse me of anything. She didn't lash out. She just nodded, hugging the receipt to her chest, as though keeping it close might somehow make the reality easier to endure. "I appreciate you not hiding it," she said. "I think I would have been more hurt if you'd kept it from me." I felt relief, but only for a moment, because the next thing she said made my stomach twist. "I need to know what else is in that box." Her voice trembled, but her expression had hardened not with anger, but with determination. She wasn't the same person she had been 30 minutes earlier. Something had shifted. Something had awakened. The woman who always defended her father, who clung to the idea of him as a misunderstood man doing his best, was suddenly standing on unstable ground, questioning the foundation she'd been raised on. I offered to go back to the storage unit with her the next day, but she shook her head. "No, I need to see it now." Her urgency surprised me, but I understood it. When you discover one lie, it's impossible not to wonder how many more exist. So we drove together to the unit, the sun dipping low behind the buildings as the air grew cooler. She didn't speak during the ride, she just stared out the window, blinking slowly, like someone replaying a lifetime of memories and wondering which ones were real. When we arrived, she walked ahead of me, her steps quick and uneven, As soon as the unit door rolled up, the familiar scent of dust and old cardboard filled the air. The boxers were stacked just as we'd left them, except for the smaller taped-up box I had already opened. She crouched in front of it immediately, hands shaking as she pulled out the remaining papers. At first, the documents looked ordinary: old bills, maintenance receipts, random notes written in her mother's handwriting. But then she found something that made her freeze. A folded sheet of paper tucked inside an envelope addressed to her mom. She unfolded it slowly, and I watched the light drain from her face as her eyes moved across the page. "What is it?" I asked gently. She didn't answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded distant. "It's a letter from my dad. Dated just days after that night, he mentioned things I've never heard before." She handed it to me with trembling fingers, and I read it carefully. The letter wasn't long, but every sentence carried a heaviness that settled in my chest. He apologized not for missing the night she'd always been told was due to work, but for something else entirely. Something vague, something emotional, something that implied regret but refused to name the action that caused it. It was as though he were trying to confess without actually confessing. My cousin sat back against a stack of boxers, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring at the metal ceiling as if searching for answers in the rusted beams. "Do you think my mom knew everything?" she asked. I hesitated. "I think she knew more than she told you," I said carefully. "But I also think she was trying to protect you." She covered her mouth with her hand as tears began to spill again, this time falling freely, without restraint. "I feel stupid," she whispered. "I feel like I've spent my whole life defending a man who didn't defend me." I sat down beside her, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded. "You weren't stupid," I said. "You were trusting, and you trusted the people you were supposed to." She rested her head on her knees. I don't know how to process all this, and I didn't know how to help. There are moments when comforting someone means letting them sit in the truth. Not rushed, not steered, just understood. After a few minutes, she took a shaky breath and reached for the box again. She dug deeper, searching for anything that could answer the questions spinning through her mind. About halfway down, she pulled out another envelope, this one sealed but yellowed with age. Her name was written across the front in her mother's handwriting. She stared at it for a long time before finally whispering, "She must have forgotten about this. Or maybe she meant to give it to me someday." Her fingers trembled as she carefully broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The moment she began to read, her shoulders collapsed inward. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't make a sound. When she handed the letter to me, she wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and whispered, "Read it." The letter was long pages packed with emotion, fear, and the kind of honesty people usually only share when they know they won't get another chance. Her mother wrote about the strain on their marriage, the lies she had tried to overlook, the nights she had cried alone, and the guilt she felt for hiding the truth from her daughter. But the part that hit the hardest was near the end. Her mother wrote that she hoped someday her daughter would understand that protecting her wasn't meant to be deception, but love. She admitted that she didn't want her daughter to grow up hating her father, even if he had failed them, even if he had betrayed their trust. She wanted her daughter to believe in something good, something stable, something survivable. When I finished reading, my chest ached. I looked over at my cousin, who was curled into herself, sobbing quietly. "She tried so hard," she whispered. "She carried all of this alone." I nodded. "She did it because she loved you. But now what?" she asked, lifting her head to look at me. "What am I supposed to do with all of this? How am I supposed to face the rest of the family?" They knew, they had to know. They protected everyone but me. Her eyes were red and swollen, but behind them was something fierce, something awakening. "I want the truth," she said. "All of it." Then she asked the question I had been dreading. "Will you help me find it?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to help, but because I suddenly understood the weight of what she was asking. Helping her meant tearing open years of secrets, confronting people who had spent decades constructing a carefully curated version of the past. It meant risking the fragile peace my family clung to. But when I looked at her broken, betrayed, desperate for answers, I knew I couldn't turn away. "Yes," I said, "I'll help you." And that was the moment everything began to spiral. Because once you start tugging at a thread in a family mystery, the entire fabric unravels faster than you're ready for. And sometimes, the truth you uncover doesn't just change everything. It destroys the version of your family you thought you. The days that followed felt like we were moving through a fog, one thick enough that every step felt heavy and uncertain. My cousin barely slept. She kept rereading the letter her mother left for her, almost as if each pass would reveal something new hidden between the lines. I kept checking on her, bringing food she barely touched, sitting with her in silence when words felt useless. But beneath all that quiet grief, something was building inside her, a need for clarity that had nowhere to go except forward. The turning point came on the fourth day, when she knocked on my door late in the evening. Her face was pale, but her eyes had a sharpness that wasn't there before. "I want to talk to my dad," she said. The sentence alone made the air in the room feel colder. I understood why he was the one person she could no longer avoid if she wanted the full truth. But he was also the one person capable of shattering her completely. "Are you sure you're ready?" I asked. She nodded, though the motion wasn't convincing. "No," she admitted, "but waiting won't make it easier." We decided to go together. He lived one town over, in a small house he'd rented after retiring early. Growing up, I'd always seen him as stern but affectionate, a man who kept his emotions buried under a calm exterior. Now, I wondered how many of his quiet moments had actually been guilt settling into the cracks of his life. When we arrived, he answered the door with surprise. His hair had grayed significantly, and he wore the same kind of flannel shirt he had worn for decades. "Hey," he said, smiling softly at his daughter. "I didn't know you were coming." But the smile faded when he saw her expression. "Is everything okay?" She stepped inside without answering. I followed her, closing the door behind me. The house smelled faintly of coffee and something metallic, like old tools that hadn't been used in years. My cousin stood in the middle of the living room, clutching her mother's letter in one hand and the receipt in the other. Her father watched her carefully, a tension forming in his posture. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "I need you to tell me the truth about that night." He blinked slowly, as if he needed time to process her words. "What night?" She held up the receipt. He froze. The kind of freeze that happens when someone's body reacts before their mind has time to find a lie. His eyes locked onto the date, the address, the signature. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "Does it matter?" Her voice cracked. "Just tell me why you lied. Tell me why everyone lied." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face went pale, his hands shook, and slowly, he lowered himself into a chair as if his knees could no longer hold him. "I didn't want you to know," he finally said. "I didn't want you to carry that." She stared at him with disbelief. "Carry what?" "The truth. You let me build my entire identity around thinking you were some selfless hero." He looked down. "Your mother asked me not to tell you." That sentence lit something inside her, not anger yet, but a deep, aching disappointment. "I already know she hid things," she said, "but I didn't know you were part of it too." He rubbed his forehead with both hands. "I made a mistake that night. A bad one. And your mom? She didn't want it to destroy the family." "What mistake?" she demanded. "Tell me what you did." He was silent for a long time, breathing heavily, eyes wet. When he finally spoke, the words were barely audible. "I wasn't working late," he admitted. "I wasn't doing overtime. I wasn't helping anyone." She swallowed hard. "I know that part. I want to know where you were." He hesitated again, and the silence became suffocating. I could practically hear her heartbeat in the quiet house. "I met someone," he whispered. "Someone who wasn't your mother." Her entire body tensed, but she didn't interrupt. "It wasn't serious. It didn't last. But it was wrong, and I knew it. Your mom found out. That night was the beginning of the end. Not of our marriage, but of the way we saw each other." My cousin lowered herself to the couch, her fingers trembling so violently she dropped the receipt to the floor. "So all those years you let me think you were working yourself to death for us, when really you were." She couldn't finish the sentence. He nodded slowly. "I let you believe that because I thought it was better for you than knowing I failed." She looked up at him, with a mixture of heartbreak and disgust. "Better for me? You think lying to me, my whole life was better for me?" He winced, as if her words physically struck him. "I wanted to protect you," he said. "No," she replied sharply. "You wanted to protect yourself." The room fell into a heavy silence that felt like it had its own weight. Her father's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked small, like a man who had spent decades building a wall, and was now crushed under the bricks. After what felt like an eternity, my cousin spoke again, her voice softer but full of pain. "Was Mom happy? Even a little? Did she forgive you?" He wiped his eyes with shaking hands. "She loved you more than anything in the world. That's what kept her strong. And yes, she forgave me in her own way. She stayed because she didn't want you growing up in a broken home." My cousin stared at him, a deep grief filling her eyes. "But it was broken," she whispered. "You just hid it better." He lowered his head. "You're right, and I'm sorry. I have been sorry every day since." Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "You didn't just betray Mom," she said. "You betrayed me." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He knew she was right. She stood abruptly, grabbing the receipt from the floor. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she said. "I don't know how to process any of this, but I needed to hear it from you." She turned to leave. I followed her, but before I stepped outside, her father said my name. I looked back. His eyes were red, his face trembling. "Take care of her," he whispered. "Please." I nodded, though something inside me felt conflicted. He didn't deserve comfort, but he deserved truth. Now he had it. Outside, the evening air was cold, and my cousin hugged herself as she walked toward the car. "Are you okay?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, and I won't be for a while." She got into the passenger seat, staring straight ahead as if the world had lost its shape. "But I'm not done," she added quietly. "There's more to this. I can feel it." And she was right. The truth we uncovered that night was just the surface. Something deeper, something older was still waiting. And neither of us had any idea just how far the next thread would pull. The drive back to my house was almost completely silent. My cousin kept her eyes fixed on the window, watching the passing streetlights blur into long yellow streaks. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale, breathing uneven in that way someone breathes when they're trying not to fall apart in public. I wanted to say anything, but every sentence that formed in my mind felt too small for the weight she was carrying. When we finally reached my driveway, she didn't get out immediately. She just sat there staring at the dashboard, her expression blank in a way I'd never seen before. "He didn't even hesitate," she finally whispered. "He didn't deny it. He just folded." I nodded, waiting. She turned her head toward me, eyes swollen, voice trembling. "Do you know what that means?" "It means he's been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to corner him with the truth." She laughed bitterly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I spent my entire life defending him. Every fight, every argument, every time someone hinted he might not have been the hero, I believed he was. I fought for him." Her voice cracked and she covered her mouth to hold back a sob. "He let me." I reached over gently, not touching her yet, just giving her space to speak. "When you love someone," she continued, "you build your personality around the version of them you need. And when that version collapses, where does that leave you?" She finally opened the car door and stepped out, air sharp against her tear-stained cheeks. She walked toward the porch steps slowly, as if each movement required conscious effort. I followed her inside and she immediately went to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water she didn't drink. She set it down and leaned on the counter. "There's more," she said softly. "I know there is. Mom wouldn't have left me just a letter. She wasn't that kind of person." I thought she meant emotionally. But then she added, "I want to go back to the storage unit tomorrow." "We already went through most of it," I reminded her gently. "We thought we did," she said. "But that box, why was it so taped up? Why was it separate from the others? Why did she hide something with my name on it and never give it to me?" She pushed her hair back, frustration boiling beneath her grief. She wasn't careless. She was intentional. If there's one letter, there could be more. I didn't disagree. Something about the way her mother wrote that letter felt incomplete, like she was trying to open a door without stepping through it herself. "Okay," I said. "We'll go tomorrow morning." She nodded gratefully, then sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "Do you think Mom hated him?" she asked quietly. It was such a raw question that I had to take a breath before answering. "I don't think she hated him," I said. "I think she was hurt, I think she was tired, and I think she stayed for you." My cousin looked up, her eyes shining with tears. "I didn't ask her to stay. You didn't have to," I said gently. "Parents make choices their kids never get a say in." She cried again, but this time she didn't try to hide it. I sat beside her, not saying anything, just letting her release the weight she had carried for too many years. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her into a restless sleep on the couch. I covered her with a blanket and stayed up, thinking about everything we had uncovered. A receipt, a letter, a confession. And still, something felt missing. Her mother had kept that box hidden for a reason. People don't bury the truth unless they're protecting something, or someone. When morning came, my cousin woke with swollen eyes and a fresh determination. She barely touched breakfast, but she insisted she was ready. At the storage unit, she walked straight back to the same stack of boxes, her hands moving with an urgency that bordered on panic. She emptied the small box completely, laying out every document on the concrete floor. "There has to be something else," she murmured. "There has to be." I crouched beside her, helping sift through papers. That was when she noticed the bottom corner of the box peeling uneven, slightly lifted. "What is that?" she whispered. She pulled at it gently, and the cardboard bottom lifted like a false panel. Beneath it, taped flat to the actual base of the box, was another envelope, thicker, heavier, sealed. And again, her name written across it. She stared at it with trembling fingers. She hid this on purpose, she said. She didn't want anyone else finding it. She peeled the tape slowly, carefully, as if afraid the contents might fall apart. Inside were several folded documents, thicker than letters, certificates, copies, printouts, and one handwritten note. She read the note first, her lips moving silently as her eyes flicked across the lines. Then she handed it to me with shaking hands. The letter was shorter than the first one, but far more devastating. "If you are reading this, It means you found what I couldn't say out loud. Your father made mistakes. I spent years trying to forgive. But the truth is bigger than that night. I need you to know what really happened, even if it changes the way you see both of us." My stomach tightened as I looked at my cousin. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even breathing normally. Her silence was thick, dangerous. She picked up the rest of the papers and flipped through them. "Birth records," she said, confused. "These are mine." She examined the documents closely. "But why are there two?" I leaned closer. She was right. There were two versions of her birth certificate, one official, the other edited, altered. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. Buried between the sheets was one final envelope, this one addressed not to her, but to her mother. She opened it anyway. Inside was a letter written in her father's handwriting. My cousin read it silently, then slowly lowered the page, staring into nothing. "It wasn't just an affair," she said in a hollow voice. "It wasn't just one mistake." Her hands trembled violently. "My father wasn't where he said he was because he wasn't supposed to be with us that night at all." She swallowed hard. "He was with someone else. Yes, but not the way we thought." Mom wrote that she confronted him because he was planning to leave. Not temporarily, not for a break, for good. My heart sank. He was going to walk out. She nodded, tears gathering again. He told her he wanted a different life, a different family. He said he never felt ready to be a father. She pressed her palm over her eyes as a sob escaped her, and Mom stayed quiet. She pretended everything was fine. Also, I wouldn't grow up knowing my father tried to abandon us. The truth rolled through her like an earthquake, violent, unstoppable. But she wasn't done reading. Her eyes moved back to the documents, her fingers flipping desperately as if searching for an anchor. As she read, her breathing changed. Fast, shallow. "Wait," she whispered. "No, this can't." She thrust the papers toward me. I grabbed them and scanned the information. My pulse spiked. The documents weren't just birth certificates, they were hospital forms, admission records, notes from the night she was born, and one detail stood out, circled in her mother's handwriting. The field marked father was blank, completely blank. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of cars passing in the distance, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights inside the storage unit, even our own breathing, everything felt muted, like the world had suddenly stepped back to give space to the truth that had just surfaced. My cousin stared at the blank father line on the hospital record as if it were a bomb ticking in her hands. Her jaw trembled, her fingers tightening around the edges of the paper until it crinkled. "He wasn't there," she whispered eventually, her voice cracking. "He didn't sign. He didn't claim me." I tried to speak, but no words felt right. She sank down onto the cold concrete floor, knees pulled to her chest. The documents scattered around her like pieces of a life she no longer recognized. "All those years," she said softly, "he told me he was the one who held me first. He said he drove Mom to the hospital. He said he cried when I was born." Her shoulders shook. "He said he loved me from the moment he saw me." She lifted her head, eyes red and hollow. None of that was true. Not one word. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. He wasn't even there. I sat down beside her slowly, giving her space but not leaving her alone. "Maybe he didn't sign because he wasn't present yet," I said gently. "Maybe he came later." She shook her head violently. "No. Look." She shoved another paper into my hands. A hospital times. Her mother had checked in late in the evening. The birth happened early the next morning. Her father's name appeared nowhere. Not on the admission form, not on the discharge papers, not on any of the emergency notations her mother had included in her journal entries. "He wasn't in the building," she whispered. "He wasn't with us. Not even then." A tear slid down her cheek, and Mom protected him anyway. I could feel her unraveling beside me, pain, layered over pain, betrayal stacking on top of years of unasked questions. She picked up her mother's second letter again, reading it with a new lens, scanning for subtle hints, omissions, anything that aligned with what we had just uncovered. "She says she forgave him," she murmured. "But now, I'm not sure forgiveness was the whole story." She handed the letter to me, pointing at a line near the end. "I didn't tell you everything because I didn't want you to feel unwanted. Not by me, not by him. Even if the beginning was messy, even if he made choices that hurt us, I never wanted you to feel like you were a mistake." My cousin closed her eyes tightly, inhaling shakily. "A mistake," she repeated, voice trembling. "She thought he might make me feel like a mistake." "No," I corrected gently. "She didn't want you to ever feel that way. That's why she hid everything." "But he let her," she said, tears spilling again. "He let her carry that entire burden so he could pretend he was the perfect dad." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands tangled in her hair. "I need answers," she whispered. "Not just from him, from everyone." She stood abruptly and began pacing the storage unit, her steps echoing sharply. "My mom knew he wanted to leave," she said. "She knew he wasn't there when I was born. She knew he wasn't the man I thought he was. She turned to me, eyes blazing with a mixture of pain and determination. But who else knew? It was a good question. And the answer, unfortunately, was obvious. The older generation. The ones who had lived through it. The ones who had watched everything unfold. The ones who had remained silent for decades. My aunt, her mother, was gone. My uncle, her father, was emotionally shattered but alive. And then there were the others. Her grandparents, now elderly. Her father's older sister, her mother's closest friend who had been around from the beginning. Any of them might have known the truth. Any of them might have helped hide it. I want to talk to Grandma, she said suddenly. She'll tell me anything. I hesitated. Her grandmother was sweet, gentle, and fragile both, physically and emotionally. But if anyone had the full truth, it was her. Okay, I said. We'll go. We gathered the documents carefully, placing them back into the envelope, then into her bag. She gripped the receipts and letters as if letting them go for even a second might cause them to disappear. The drive to her grandmother's house took 20 minutes, but the tension made it feel longer. My cousin tapped her foot nervously the entire ride, clutching the envelope in her hands. When we pulled into the driveway, she inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. "Do you want me to come in with you?" I asked. She nodded. "I can't do this alone." Her grandmother opened the door wearing a soft smile that immediately faded when she saw my cousin's expression. "Sweetheart," she said, pulling her inside. "What's wrong?" My cousin didn't dance around it. She didn't start with small talk. She walked straight into the living room, sat down on the sofa, and laid the documents on the coffee table. "Grandma," she said quietly, "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. About Dad, about the night I was born, about everything." Her grandmother's face drained of color. Her eyes lingered on the envelope, and I could tell instantly she recognized it. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "From Mom's storage unit," my cousin answered. "She left it for me." Her grandmother slowly lowered herself into the armchair across from us. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them together. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "I was afraid this day would come." My cousin stiffened. "So you knew." Her grandmother closed her eyes, nodding weakly. "I knew pieces. Not everything. But enough to understand the weight your mother carried. Did you know he wasn't there when I was born?" My cousin asked, her voice breaking. Her grandmother hesitated, and then she nodded. "Your mother called me that night," she said softly. "She was alone, scared. She didn't want to worry you about it when you were older. She hoped things would get better." My cousin covered her mouth as tears welled again. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she asked through a sob. Her grandmother's eyes filled with tears as well. "Because your mother didn't want you growing up with resentment. She wanted you to have a father, even if he wasn't perfect. She thought that giving you stability, even if it was partially built on forgiveness and silence, was better than telling you the truth." My cousin shook her head, wiping her tears angrily. "But that wasn't her decision to make. That was my life. My right to know. My right to understand where I came from." Her grandmother nodded sadly. "You're right, and she knew that too. That's why she wrote those letters." My cousin stared at her intensely. "Grandma, was he planning to leave us?" Her grandmother hesitated again. The pause said more than any sentence could. "Yes," she finally whispered. "He was confused, lost, immature, and your mother, she begged him to stay. Not for her, but for you." My cousin closed her eyes in agony, and he stayed. Her grandmother continued gently, "But not entirely. Not in the way you deserved. Your mother spent years trying to hold the family together. She kept hoping he'd grow into the father you needed. He didn't," my cousin whispered. "He tried," her grandmother replied softly, "but he never forgave himself, and your mother. She forgave too much." My cousin sank back into the couch, her whole body trembling. "Do you know who my father is?" she asked suddenly, the question falling out like a stone dropping into deep water. Her grandmother's eyes widened. "Your father is the man who raised you, biologically," my cousin said, voice sterner. Her grandmother looked down at her hands, fingers twisting anxiously. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know your mother loved you with every piece of herself. And she would have wanted you to know that the circumstances of your birth do not define your worth." My cousin's breathing turned uneven, panic creeping in. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she whispered. I leaned closer, placing a steadying hand near hers. "You're still you," I said softly, "and you're not alone." She cried again quietly, brokenly, but something about this time felt different. The pain no longer looked sharp and disorienting. Now it looked deeper, slower, settling into her bones. Her grandmother placed a hand over my cousin's. "Your mother wanted you to find the truth," she said gently, "but she also wanted you to survive it." My cousin wiped her face, sitting up straighter. "I'm going to find out who my real father is," she said, not as a question, not as a plea, as a vow. And in that moment, I realized that everything up until now, every receipt, every letter, Every lie had been just the beginning. The truth hadn't destroyed her, it had awakened her. And now she wasn't searching for answers to the past anymore. She was searching for herself. The drive home from her grandmother's house felt heavier than any silence we'd shared before. My cousin didn't cry this time. She didn't shake or collapse or stare blankly out the window like she had hours earlier. Instead, she sat unnaturally still, gripping the envelope of documents on her lap with both hands as if the papers inside were the only thing anchoring her to reality. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. It should have been a peaceful view, but she barely noticed it. She wasn't in the car anymore. She was somewhere deep inside her own mind, piecing together a version of her life that had never existed, trying to rebuild an identity she suddenly wasn't sure belonged to her at all. When we pulled into my driveway, she finally spoke. "I want a DNA test." There was no hesitation, no tremor in her voice, just certainty. The kind of certainty that comes when someone has broken open the truth so completely that the only path forward is through whatever answer hurts the most. "Okay," I said, keeping my tone gentle. She nodded firmly. "I'm done with halfway truths. I'm done with letting other people decide what I'm allowed to know." She stepped out of the car, clutching the envelope tightly to her chest. "I need to know who I am, and I need to know who he is." We went inside, and she sat at the kitchen table while I grabbed my laptop. She watched as I pulled up the website for a DNA kit, her fingers tapping anxiously against the table. "This might take weeks," I warned. "I don't care," she whispered. "I've waited my whole life without knowing. I can wait a little longer." After ordering the kit, she leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. For a while, neither of us said anything. The weight of her discovery hung between us like a physical presence. Finally, she turned toward me, her voice soft but steady. "Do you think Mom wanted me to know?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "If she didn't, she wouldn't have left those letters. She wouldn't have hidden them for you to find." My cousin nodded slowly, absorbing that. "I feel like she's guiding me," she whispered, "like she's still helping me." Even now there was something comforting in that, something grounding. After everything we'd uncovered, the lies, the omissions, the secrets buried under decades of silence, believing her mother still had a hand in her journey made the pain feel just a little less sharp. Over the next few days, my cousin stayed with me. She didn't want to be alone, and I didn't want her to be. Every morning she woke early, sorting through the documents again, searching for patterns, clues, anything that might point toward the identity of her biological father. But the trail was thin. A date, a receipt, a missing signature, a second version of a birth certificate, her mother's hesitant confessions, written in ink now faded with time. It wasn't much, but it was enough to know that the truth existed somewhere beyond the walls of her childhood, and the broken stories she'd been fed. On the 5th day, she received a text from her father. "Can we talk?" She stared at the message for a long time before sighing. "He deserves a chance to explain," she said softly. I didn't argue. She invited him over that evening. When he arrived, he looked different, as if the confession he'd made days earlier had aged him overnight. His shoulders slumped. His eyes were tired. The weight of his past decisions clung to him like an old coat that had grown too heavy to wear. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tightly together. "I'm sorry," he began. "I should have told you the truth a long time ago." She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She just listened. "I wasn't there the night you were born," he said quietly. "Your mother went to the hospital without me. I was lost, confused, running from responsibilities I didn't think I was ready for." My cousin swallowed hard. "Did you love her?" "Yes," he said, "but fear makes people do selfish things." He rubbed his face tiredly. "When she told me you were mine, I didn't believe her at first. I was stupid. I wanted to believe the worst, so I didn't have to face what it meant to step up." My cousin's voice trembled, but she kept her composure. "Why didn't you sign my birth certificate?" He lowered his head. "Because I wasn't there. And because I hadn't decided if I was going to stay." She exhaled shakily. "But you did stay." "Yes," he said, "but not the way you deserved. I stayed physically, but emotionally. It took me years to grow into the man I should have been from the start." She stared at him, her eyes full of hurt. "Did Mom know you doubted I was yours?" He nodded slowly. "She knew, and she forgave me anyway." My cousin wiped a tear from her cheek. "Did you ever get a DNA test?" "No," he said quickly. "I didn't need one. Once I held you." His voice cracked. "Once I held you, I knew. I knew you were mine. Even if the timing was complicated." She went still, completely still. I could almost hear her heartbeat stutter. "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed," he whispered. "And I didn't want you to see me differently." She laughed, but it wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. "Everything is different," she said softly. "Everything." He looked devastated, but he didn't try to defend himself. He didn't try to justify his choices. He just sat there, absorbing the consequences of decades-old decisions. I can't change the past, he said, but I want to be here now, if you let me. My cousin wiped her cheeks again. I don't know how to do that yet, she admitted. I don't know how to trust you. He nodded, accepting the pain without resistance. I understand. For a moment, the three of us sat in silence, heavy, exhausted, but something about it felt honest. A place to rebuild from, even if the foundation had cracked beyond recognition. After he left, my cousin sat with me on the couch, hugging her knees to her chest. What if he's not my father? She whispered. What if the DNA test proves it? Then you'll know the truth, I said. And knowing is better than wondering. She rested her head on my shoulder. I don't know if I'm ready. You don't have to be ready, I replied. You just have to be brave. Weeks passed. Slowly, painfully, and then, one morning, the email arrived. Your DNA results are ready. My cousin stared at the screen, her hand hovering over the mouse. Will you look with me? She asked. Of course. She clicked. The page loaded. And in an instant, everything, the lies, the secrets, the quiet suffering came, crashing into sharp, undeniable focus. At the top of the page, highlighted in bold text, were the words, Parent-child match, 0%. My cousin covered her mouth as a sound escaped her, a sound I'd never forget. A sound that wasn't just heartbreak, but awakening. He's not my father, she whispered. He never was. She fell into my arms, sobbing harder than she had through the entire journey. But, beneath the grief, I could feel something else emerging. Not relief, not closure, but truth. Truth that was finally hers. And for the first time since the nightmare began, her tears weren't coming from confusion. They were coming from clarity. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red, she breathed deeply and said the words that marked the true ending of her story. Now, I can start my life over. And she did.